Well, Dustin, this is our first start, and we've already started talking, so we'll just sort of jump in the middle of this. Um, Talking about the world of psychology and the Western world versus the teaching of the Buddha. I would go so far as to say that, let's talk about it like this: the world is good. The world is full of good advice. Sometimes Christians have good advice. Sometimes even Muslims have good advice. Sometimes psychotherapists have good advice. Sometimes lawyers have good advice. Accountants have good advice. Doctors have good advice. Advice all over the place. But the problem with good advice is that people don't take the good advice when they need it most. Point of time when they need to follow that good advice, they don't do it.
Everybody waits till they're dying. I need help,
All right. So it's very much like the electronics that actually is not so much electronics, but NASA. One of the workers at NASA called Murphy came up with the law, Murphy's Law. Do you know what Murphy's Law is?
Yeah, anything that will go wrong can go wrong, and there's a second part to it. I can't remember the second part.
Second part's the important part. The second part is not only will it go, if it can go wrong, it will go wrong, and if it does go wrong, it's going to go wrong at just the worst possible moment.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's when everything goes wrong.
Exactly. So an example of that is that the computer system not going to fail at the new hotel on opening day. It's going to wait until the whole hotel fills. The first time the hotel fills up, that's when the computer is going to crash.
Yeah. Yeah,
right.
That's how it works.
Now, basically what I'm doing is I'm giving an introduction to the Pali word sati. Sati is the difference between Western psychotherapy and the teachings of the Buddha. That's it. And we could also go so far as with the right incorporation of sati into a practice that is a right, correct practice. And the students know the correct practice because they know how to practice correctly. Then that's all that's needed, is that correct practice. The philosophical underlying pinnings don't matter. The highfalutin magic doesn't matter. Whatever the teacher says doesn't matter. What matters is the student practicing correctly.
Yeah, that's pretty much what the Buddha said, right? I mean,
yes. Well, most of everything I say, I'm quoting from the Buddha, one sutra or another.
Yeah. He says, don't ask me. He says, do what I do and see what works. Right. Yeah.
All right. So basically, we're looking at the correct practice is going to be an integration of pulling all of the various facts and parts together. And that integration would lead to what we would call a unified mind. And that, in fact, is the word samadhi. The word samadhi is translated into English incorrectly, giving everybody an incorrect understanding and therefore an incorrect practice. Samadhi does not mean concentration. Samadhi means gathering the factors together. Now, concentration has the quality of honing down to the essence, getting the really, really important juicy stuff together and throwing everything else out, like concentrated orange juice or concentrated milk is basically getting the water out.
Right.
All right. Or concentrating an army would mean picking only your very best soldiers.
Okay.
So where a unifying army is going to take all the soldiers and train them correctly and put them together. And so that's the way that we're looking at samadhi. So the Eightfold Noble Path, the last step of that path, according to the way that most Westerners understand it, is sama area samadhi. They call it right noble concentration, and they miss it completely. The better way of thinking about it is right noble unification of the mind, to where we become an integrated whole human being that does not have things that are going to keep us broken up, or let us say into non-unity. We're talking about duality and non-duality right now at this basic level, in the sense that if you tell a lie, then you're separating yourself from the truth. That's a disharmony or a disunity in the mind that keeps one from, okay, another one would be harming another person. Another one would be doubt about what is anything. Any kind of doubt in the mind is going to keep the mind from being unified. Do I come? Do I go? Do I do it? Do I not do it? Etc. like that. This is the or doubt about what to do, doubt about correct practice, etc. like that. Is all of the things that are missing in the unification of mind. Now, the next thing that I'd like to put on is that it should not be the fifth step, or let us say the eighth step. It should be, in fact, the fifth step. And we're going to put all of the right action, right speech, and right livelihood at the end of the thing, because in magical Buddhism, we teach the precepts first. Panatipata Vedramani Sakavadam Samatiyami Atena Dana Vedramani. You've heard this before, I think. Kame Sumi Chaturda Vedramani Sakavadam Samatiyami Musawada Vedramani Sakavadam Samatiyami. Surely you've heard the precepts in Pali before.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. So this is what they teach children. This is the very first step. But in fact, in the noble Dhamma, these are just natural outcomes or natural results of a noble mind. One who has a noble mind will naturally not harm people. One who has a noble mind will not be out money grubbing or doing business hoping to get money for Dhamma. They're breaking a precept.
I hear you.
Because the precept is thou shalt, no, there's no thou shalt in there. Sorry about that. It's not.
That's
but rather
good.
taking money or taking things that are not freely given. Well, a business relationship is not free. If you go into a smorgasbord thinking that it's going to be free and then you fill up, you're not going to like it when they give you the bill at the end.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, if you think it's going to be free, it should be free. Or you just go into any store and you like something, you'll say, oh, I'm going to take this. And the guy says, okay, you want it, but you don't want to give money for it.
Right.
If the store owner has an open heart, he's just going to give it to you because you want it. There is actually a sutta. And in that sutta, the Buddha talks about an old potter. And what this potter did was that he would go to the riverbank and find where the rats and the snakes had been making holes into the sand, so that they were the ones who were digging up the mud. And so he would take up and not only that, but the mud that the rats were digging up was pretty good quality mud. And so he would pick that, he would go make pottery out of it, let it dry in the sun, and he would have a sign up there. And the sign was take what you want and give what you want. And that was the sign. And he was able to support himself and his family with that. And the Buddha uses that as an example of right, noble livelihood. Because it was not in the barter. It was not, and almost always business means to have some sort of talking up, selling, bait and switch, advertisements, all kinds of things like that are not noble in the business world. And then you can see that capitalism is not responsible for all of humanity. It's only responsible for those who are the greediest.
Yeah, and the way you're talking about is money flows in and then it flows out and then it flows in and then it flows out freely.
Or it flows up.
Yeah. But nobody's taking it and holding it. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's what I kind of get what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah.
Because the society is not based on greed; it's based upon mutual. It's basically the difference. There's many different ways to talk about it. One of the ways of talking about it is the reptilian mind, or the primitive part of the brain, the anterior cortex that has all of the functions of keeping the body going, and it's the source of emotion. Emotions are stored in the cerebellum in the back and things like that, as opposed to the frontal cortex is the thinking part of the mind, the human part, that which humans are different than the ordinary animals. And some people think with their frontal part of their brain, which has more to do with, let us say, the nesting instinct or cooperation or working together or society and things like that, to where the primitive part of the brain is the reptilian part of the brain, to where crocodile eats crocodile eggs and nobody nurtures their young or any of that. And so you can see that when we're children, we're born with and live in our reptilian brain. And as we mature, hopefully, we're going to mature into humans. That does not happen often. And you can see in the society where that breakdown is. If people can be manipulated with their fear, if they can be manipulated with tribalism, if they can be manipulated by lying to them, then they are living in the reptilian part of their brain. They're living in instinct. But if the person is discerning, if when they're told a lie, they know they're being lied to, when they have compassion and open heart, then they're much more human. Now, if you think about it, I've just described the distinction between the Republican and the Democrat Party.
Right.
The Republicans are a bunch of animals. They're a bunch of snakes.
Oh, God. That's funny. It's a difficult time in America.
It is. And the reason for it is because there's so many reptiles living in human bodies. They're not living a life of a human being. They're living the life of a snake.
I get it. I absolutely get it. Yeah.
Texas is full of them.
It is. Yeah, it is.
And so in a really important kind of way, what meditation is to teach the student to come out of their instincts, to come out of the old ways, to come out of their frustration, to come out of their anger, and to come out of their fear, especially fear that's associated with everything is dangerous and I'm a victim to everything. Yeah. And come out of that into a higher class, higher quality, more human-like existence. And in fact, we want to go to the top of humanity, to the very noble, the highest quality of humanity that is compassionate, that's joyful, and most of all, that's a winner, a lion, a champion. The Buddha was a lion. He was not a wimp.
Right.
And so if you're going to train in the ways of the Buddha, you've got to train in the ways to become a lion, to become successful, to know what suffering is so that we can avoid it. That's basically the whole teaching of the Buddha right there. And it's all based upon this Eightfold Noble Path that we were talking about that needs to be rearranged so that it can be understood as to how to put it into practice. By doing that, the Eightfold Noble Path also then fits directly into anapanasati, which is the main teaching that we're going to have, or the framework. So the Eightfold Noble Path shows us how to practice anapanasati, and when we see practicing anapanasati correctly, especially in the Vedana and Sita areas, it actually shows us what paticca is. Have you heard that term before?
No.
It's also known as dependent origination.
Yeah.
All right. It is also called, it's best understood is this is how the mind works.
Mm-hmm.
And when we understand how the mind works, then we can recognize the various components of the mind and recognize some really important qualities in there. And that important quality to start understanding is the human being is a mental process. And that everything is based upon now and the processing and the causes and effects, the changes that are happening moment by moment is all there is. And yet the Western mindset is event-oriented. It's based upon events that happen. To where an example of that would be the sotapan is a process. And when you understand the nature and the process of being sotapan, then you'll be able to understand where you are within that process. And that sometimes, and in fact is not only possible, but it actually does happen, that the students will move up and down on the scale of sotapan as they're progressing. And they go like this, back and forth and back and forth. But as they mature more towards going in the direction of correctness and are falling back less often. So the sotapan is not a particular marker, but it's a method or a way of understanding the correct practice, and that it does have some extraordinarily important marker points. An example would be the student on Reddit or Dhamma Overground thinks of himself and announces or whatever that he's had some events or some experiences, and then he becomes sotapan and he talks around, or maybe his teacher says okay, or any of that kind of stuff. And then after a few weeks or months, then he loses his practice, or he begins to fall off of his practice. That's a sure indication he's not sotapan. Sotapans, they don't drop that practice. They don't backslide. They don't fail quick. Exactly.
Yeah, because they're in the stream. Exactly. From what I understand, you're going.
You're doing it. Exactly. That's right. Yeah. And that going it or that doing it is what the right word to use is dedication.
Absolutely.
Now, dedication doesn't come at one point. Dedication is something that has to be done moment by moment by moment. What is my level of dedication right this moment?
Yeah.
And so in that way, you could also say that sotapan is going up and down. Sometimes my dedication is not so strong, and sometimes my dedication is really, really strong.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's all process. Now, the mind itself is a process, and as we study Paticca, you'll begin to understand that it's all process, and that one of the processes gives rise to the thought or to the idea or even the delusion that I am, or that there is a self exist.
Yeah.
And that I am is always in the tense of I am important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now that statement, I am important, is made by a victim.
Yeah.
The lion doesn't say that. What does the lion say? He just roars. Roar!
Yes. You're talking my language.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Yeah.
Because this is the language of the Dhamma.
Right.
So let's go back and look at the Eightfold Noble Path as we can apply that to the practice of anapanasati. We've already talked about the precepts and about the unification of mind. So let's start about let's start at the very beginning then.
Okay.
The Buddha in Sutta number 117 in the Great 40 says, listen closely and attentive, monks, and I will teach you about right unification of mind with its supports and requisites. Okay, so in fact, the Eightfold Noble Path is the unified mind, the mind of samadhi, the mind of area samadhi, has its supports and requisites. And that the first item on that list, the Buddha says, what comes first is right view. Now, later I will give you a very clear and deep definition of what noble right view is. Sama area dikti. Right view. Actually, one's right view becomes noble as one understands paticca samuppada. The mind becomes more and more noble. The reason for that is we become to understand that what is and what is actually not the path. Because what is not the path is basically everything you've ever been told.
Right.
Everything that every teacher, every college professor, every boss, every priest, every government official ever told you is a bunch of horse shit, and it has not made you happy.
I spent a lot of money at the psychologist. I'm gonna see if I can get that back.
Actually, that needs to be done.
Yeah.
That actually needs to be done. Someone needs to sue some psychologist for non-performance of contract.
Right. Oh, that's funny.
I paid you all of this money, and I feel just as bad as I did before I met you. I want my money back.
Yeah.
And you know something? You can find a judge that'll do that, and that would be a wake-up call to the psychologist.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
So back to right view.
Right.
Noble right view comes first. And the way that it's going to come first in the case of anapanasati is that the student is going to make the choice or have the view that it is better to watch the breath than it is to have the mind wandering off into the old crap, what we call hindrances or the panch nivarana. Now, the hindrances are, there's 5 in number, and those 5 hindrances are basically the past, the future, wanting something you don't have, having to put up with something you don't want to put up with.
Right.
And having a mind is basically not fit for work, like doubt or sloth, torpor. What I mean by that would be the difference between sloth and torpor is that the mind is really tired, as if it needs to go to sleep. We're just drowsy. That's different from the attitude of sloth, which is laziness, or I couldn't give a flying rip. In fact, that sloth or laziness is what gives rise to a Buddhist practice in the West called choiceless awareness.
Mm-hmm.
You have heard of choiceless awareness, right?
You mean noting anything that comes along?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
I've been doing it for a while.
Right. It's actually it's associated with the Mahasi method, but only in the West.
Yes. That's what I've been doing for a while.
So here's the way that we can look at that. If you were standing in the road and a Mack truck was bearing down on you and you could see it, but you don't bother to get out of the way of it, and it hits you, then what was the point of seeing it in the first place?
There was no point.
There was no point in seeing it at all. The whole point of awareness is so we can make choices.
Right.
And in this case, we're going to start right off with that first choice is going to be right view. The view is that it's better to do something about the crap.
Okay.
Than to stay lazy and slothful and not worry about it. I know students who are in fact thinking that they and call me and say, oh, well, I've already put in 8,000 hours of meditation or something like that. Like the clock is going to give them, the clock itself is going to give them some happiness. Those who are clock watchers who want that are not practicing correctly.
Right.
And so we have to make sure that the students are practicing correctly, and we have to start with right view. If we have the right view that it is better to do something, and in this regard, it's better to watch the breath than it is to sit and suffer. Now, most students, they don't even recognize that the wandering mind is suffering. They haven't seen that yet. And so they say, what, me worry? Yes, you do. That's what you're doing right now. You're worrying.
Yeah.
All right. So once we have right view, then the important one, the big one, is sati. To remember. Now, the definition that's normally used in West for the word sati, the Pali word, is mindfulness. You probably heard mindfulness this, mindfulness that all over the place, right?
Yeah, it's on magazines. It's all over the place.
Have you ever, other than outside of the Buddhist context, ever heard of the word mindfulness?
Well, they use it in psychology and psychiatrists and all them now.
Yeah, but they stole it from Buddhism.
I know. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So mindfulness is an invented word, and that it basically is straddling two of the aspects of the method. And by straddling those two, it doesn't point out the fact that if you're standing with one foot in one boat and one foot in another boat, that it's really hard to keep those boats together so that you stay dry.
Yeah.
It's really hard to ride two horses, one foot on one horse and one foot on the other horse. You got to keep those horses together or you're going to be in the dust.
Right.
Right? That's the problem with mindfulness, is because mindfulness is straddling two different qualities, and the students almost always fail. Yeah. What are those two qualities? Is right view and right sati. Right view, in fact, if you think about a view, the view is a point or maybe a moving point of investigation, a point of reference. And so basically when one is practicing right view, one is practicing investigation. And the deeper our right view is, the more investigative it is, to the point that we never do come to a conclusion. We always keep investigating. Any conclusion we come to, we recognize as temporary. Today's conclusion is tomorrow's suffering.
Right.
And so we have to keep looking, keep investigating. By doing this now, we're beginning to also build up, very slowly, the enlightenment factors. If we keep investigating, if we keep remembering to investigate, and keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. The way that I'm doing my hands right now is like the beating of a drum. What we mean by unremitting. So imagine like this, a drum. This is the drum head. This is the mallet. Is this the right way to play a drum? This is the Buddhist way of playing a drum. Or this is the Mahasi way of playing a drum. The word Mahasi actually means mighty drum. But that's not the way to play a drum, is it? You just place the mallet on the drum head and let it sit there.
Right.
It's not the way to play a drum, and that's not the way to practice anapanasati either. This is the right way to play a drum. Okay? And you hear it because it's got that force behind it. There's energy, there's effort there. One's right effort is needed.
Right.
But just enough effort, because most Westerners, they work too hard. In fact, this is the way that the Westerners work too hard.
Yeah.
That's the way that they practice meditation, and that's not the right way. The correct practice is repeating, to remember, to keep remembering throughout the day. Now, the sitting meditation is merely nothing but that which we do to get into gear or to get into practice. The sitting practice is low gear at best.
Right.
So when we sit in seclusion, we sit there in seclusion because if we're in seclusion, we're away from the outside world. Now, the silly and surprising thing is that when we're in seclusion, sitting there on the cushion, our morality, our sila is perfect. We're not beating up anybody. We're not stealing any purses. We're just sitting there. Okay. It depends upon what we're doing in the mind. I mean, we could be plotting a bank job.
Yeah. Yeah.
But hopefully, if we're secluded and sitting in meditation, that's the time to practice correctly, when it's the easiest to deal with it, because the hindrances that we're dealing with are only in one's own mind.
Yes.
But later, that sati needs to be developed so that it's there all day long. Or not all day, because if I give you the mentality of all day long, you'll set that up as a goal, you'll fail, and then you'll feel miserable. So stop. Absolutely. Don't think about it as all day long. Think about it as doing it whenever you remember. And that your job is to remember.
Right.
Your job is to remember. That's the number one skill to be developed, is right sati, working in conjunction with right view. And now we take on right effort. And right effort is just the amount of right effort to get the job done. Now, wrong effort would be the victim's way of doing it, in a sense, and this happens with almost every student. When they see the mind wandering away from the breath, they feel bad. There's even a favorite phrase for it that's been around for centuries. It goes, gosh, I don't know how far back, but it's at least 600, 700, 800 years old, but it does not go back to the time of the Buddha. That expression is monkey mind.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks monkey mind, monkey mind, monkey mind, because it's jumping all over the place. Well, they don't like that monkey mind. The idea that most Westerners have is, oh, meditation sounds easy enough, I can do that. And then the mind wanders away, and then they get all pissed off because they can't control their mind and they thought they could.
Yeah. Yeah.
It reminds me of a scripture out of the Bible that Jesus said, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. But he left off the third line. The third line is, ye shall know the truth shall set you free, but first it's going to piss you off.
Real bad.
Yes. Why? Because it shows that the truth is going to point out our delusions.
Absolutely.
And all of our delusions are all of the reasons that we're suffering. If we can come out of delusion, according to the second noble truth, which means that the wakey, the wake-up call, that to come back into reality, has to overcome our opinions of what reality was before we saw it. Which means basically we have to give up our entire past. Yeah. Because our entire past has been supporting our delusions. This is part of the reason why everything has to do with the teaching of the Buddha about be here now. Everything is in the present moment. Even the Buddha, who we call Buddha, which means to be awake, which is basically just sati. In fact, there was another one named Sati, son of a fisherman. But the Buddha did not refer to himself as Buddha. What did he call himself? Tathagata. What does Tathagata mean? Well, the word tatata means here now, or thusness, or thisness, or this is it. Now, in a larger context, that's what the word Dhamma means. That when the Dhamma gets really big, as the big here now, the reality or the environment that we live in, that's when real unity, when we can merge with the Dhamma, or actually be as the here now, be in the here now. And when I say be, I've got to make sure that we're working with that word correctly, so let me play with it just a bit. There is a thing called human, and then there is a thing called human being. The human being is that which is being human. And you can be human without being a human being. The human being is the selfish part of the human. And so we have to be careful with these English language words because the whole language of English language is built upon the concept of a self or a soul. And as we begin to progress through the Dhamma, we begin to see, that self or soul that the whole language is built upon is nothing but a mental construction. Other than that, it doesn't actually exist in there. That everything that does exist is mostly a process. And that when that process goes wrong, we wind up in selfishness. We wind up in suffering.
Yeah.
But if we learn to manage that process correctly, then we don't wind up in selfishness. We don't wind up in suffering.
Because there's no self.
Because there was no self except that which we created, because we think we needed to protect it. And it didn't need any protection at all.
Oh, yeah. That's good.
Okay, here's an example of that. The young student, age 14, walks down the hall at school, and around the corner comes the bully and his two friends. Immediately, this 14-year-old goes into panic mode, and the bully picks up on that. Why? Because the 14-year-old, has made a major mistake. He thinks that this situation is dangerous. He's living here at school, and he thinks he's out in the jungle. He thinks there's a real predator out there. No, it's just a high school bully. That's all it is. All he has to do is stand up, or better still, just laugh at the bully. You can even laugh at the bully's friends. You say, why are you here with this bully? You want to get in the same trouble he's getting into? Why do you look up to this turd? Separate and divide. But that takes a lion's position. That takes guts that 14-year-old at that moment doesn't have. He doesn't have it. He's a victim. He sees that situation, so he goes into what we call automatic pilot, or back into instinctual protective mode, rather than recognizing with his frontal cortex that this is school. This is not dangerous.
Right.
This is not a dangerous situation. It doesn't matter what the bully says to me or even flicks my chest. He can't hurt me. That I'm already doing all the hurting inside myself. Everything that bully wants to do to me, I'm already doing it just by seeing him coming around the corner.
That's good. That is so true. I mean, that's just amazing you say that, because I'm already fired up about the whole situation. I'm already suffering before it even happens. Mm-hmm. He was probably thinking about it before he even got to school.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Perhaps. Yep. And if his dad would say, you go be a lion in front of that bully, the kid wouldn't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dad says, go stand up to him, and the kid doesn't know how to do that.
Right.
Because he's in survival mode. Okay, well, guess what? Most of the world lives their lives in survival mode. We think we need something that we don't need. An example of that would be that everyone thinks that their body is not quite good enough. The entire society works very hard to teach everybody that no matter what your body is not quite good enough.
Yeah.
You don't have enough hair. You don't have enough ruby red lips, etc., like that. So look at all the industries that have cropped up. Maybelline, Max Factor, Revlon,
Oh,
All
yeah.
of these Gillette, Nike, all of these companies are in business to sell things that no one needs.
Right.
How can they sell anything that people don't need? It's by lying to them, by convincing them that they do need it, by making them feel insufficient without it, so
Yeah.
that they'll go buy the product so that they'll feel better. And so if the world begins to wake up, the entire business world is going to fall apart.
Oh, I'm sure it would.
In fact, it looks like the Tesla is going to do that, just as on the side. You know, the entire business model of the automobile industry is, and it started with Ford. Ford needed dealers to get his cars out. The dealers bought the cars and used local financing so that they could buy the cars, and that put the money back into Henry Ford's pocket. And so you have all of this dealer network system set up to sell cars. And so they want to keep selling cars, and so they build in obsolescence and other things like that to keep selling them. Tesla's model is going to be, Tesla's going to stop selling his electric cars. Elon Musk is going to stop selling them and start putting them right out on the road like they were Uber.
Oh, yeah.
So that people don't even need to buy cars anymore. Tesla is possibly going to destroy Ford and GM and all those other companies who don't think on that same new business model of instant service. The car is only useful right now when you need it. But yet most cars, like we've got a 1997 pickup Honda sitting out here in the yard, and it is nowhere near at 1%.
Mm-hmm.
That truck will sit there for weeks at a time without going anywhere. We don't need it until we do need it. But if there was Uber on this island, then we wouldn't need the truck at all.
Right.
So the whole business model is going to change because of technology. But AI technology is going to change it in another way, and that is that a whole lot of people, you see, since the Industrial Revolution, the whole mentality is you got to work for a living. There are big businesses who hire people, and you've got to go work for them in order to survive. Well, guess what? Those big businesses don't need you anymore now. They've got it all done with robots and AI and whatnot like that. So what is the guy to do? Probably the first phase is going to be sports. But eventually, the entire population is going to need Dhamma in order to survive. To come out of their mentality of, I've got to work for a living, into, hey, let's all get along together. Let's have a party.
Right.
Let's stop trying to exploit and compete with one another, because all of the competition has now already been done by the machines and they won. Let them do it. And so we actually need the Dhamma at this time when it is not quite ready for it. But eventually, I would say in 10 years, there's going to be a mass need for the Dhamma, because people have been doing their time structuring and getting their jollies out of employment, because that was the thing to do. Now, employment's not going to be the thing to do. Now, leisure time is going to be the thing to do. How can we manage our leisure time? The answer is very happily. Thank you very much.
No kidding.
But if we know how, but we're going to have to come out of that old training, that old mentality of work to eat. And you see, that's how the Dhamma is being taught now, going back to that business model. How can the teachers who are money grubbing teaching the Dhamma teach students how to stop money grubbing?
Right.
How can they teach them to be wealthy? How can they teach them to be the very things that the teacher himself are not?
Right.
It is fairly well known that a teacher can only teach a student up to the level that the teacher himself is. That's why every student needs more than one teacher.
Right.
I've had many Dhamma teachers. I expect you to have many Dhamma teachers.
Yeah.
And so there's no reason for Dhamma teachers to compete with each other, especially since the only jollies we get out of it is the benefit that the student derives. We sort of do it secondhand. And by the way, that's wonderful. If you think it's quite nice to feel wealthy, start seeing your own students grow to that point. And that's the real joy. That's what, and I can understand that with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and especially Achan Po. Achan Po has got quite a flock of teachers under him now, and I know that he really, really enjoys the fact that he's got students who have really gotten the Dhamma.
Right. I'm sure.
And so that's what I'm beginning to experience now that I'm doing this on the internet. Under the, let us say, not necessarily quite so watchful, but under the auspices of what Sawan Mok and Achan Po, who is now the abbot. He's 87 now and spends most of his time over on Koh Samui. But he's the one who basically insisted that I do this internet, the Skype stuff.
Right.
And I'm seeing that it's actually going to be of some value, because most of the teachings of the West are not done in this open-hearted way, but rather it's taken on the business model. Now, there's quite a number of places, actually Western places, that are doing it for Dana only. And so I would recommend students, if you're going to do a retreat, always go to the places that do it for just Dana, that they don't set a price.
Yeah.
That was the first criteria.
Yeah, I was looking at two different ones in the last couple of days that do it for Dana.
Your Texas accent is really coming out in the moment. I can really tell it.
You like that, huh?
I've actually got another student. He's somewhere between Adelaide and Fort Worth. His name is Daryl. Eventually, you might be able to meet him. But he's an old student.
I work in Fort Worth. That's funny. Yeah.
And so, yes, there are Lao temples I've been to in Houston, or excuse me, in Dallas. So I know that they're there. So anyway, let's get back then to the Eightfold Noble Path, because the last one that we haven't really talked about at all or mentioned is the quality of what is called right attitude. Now, in various translations, in the normal list, it goes with right view and then right something or another that is listed normally as thought, right intention, or something like that. But we're going to be using most specifically the word attitude, because that's what we're actually working on. The attitude is now going to be the attitude of a winner, not a loser.
Right.
Because the attitude of the loser is that which we're coming out of. So at that point in time when sati arises, and the student knows that the mind has wandered away from the breath, and he already has enough right view to say that, okay, we're going to now change it from the mind wandering away into watching the breath. We're going to do it with the right effort, leading to the right attitude. And that right effort is the right in anapanasati, it's got 16 steps. These 16 steps are actually the four foundations of mindfulness called the satipatthana, which has body, feeling, mind, and mind objects. And so there are various aspects for the body, various aspects for the feeling, various aspects for the mind, and various aspects for the mind's objects. Well, at this particular time, when the mind has recognized that it's wandered away from the breath, we've already noted several things. One is we've noted that the mind objects are not what we want them to be. They're hindrances. Number two, we also are able to see the mind. We can experience the mind. And in this case, we experience the mind as a mind of hindrance rather than a mind of freedom. And so now we're going to change it from a mind of hindrance to a mind of freedom with step number 10 of anapanasati, or the second part of the mind, which is to gladden the mind, to make it bright. We can do that with several things like, aha, I see you. I see you, Mr. Hindrance.
Ooh.
Later on, it's going to be like, I see you, Mr. Anger. And then later after that, I see you, Mr. Conceit. I see you, Mr. Anxiety.
Oh, wow.
Eventually, I'll see you, Mr. Fear. I see that stuff. I can see it happening. But in the beginning, we start with, I see you, Mr. Mind, wandering away. And we gladden the mind with that. So now we're already using the body. Now, the important point about the body is that the very first step of anapanasati that the Buddha talks about is the most important step of anapanasati in the effect that it has. And that is to take that long, deep breath. Normally, when we're sitting in meditation, the body gets starved of oxygen and that it goes almost into survival mode. This is one of the reasons why students get tired and drowsy in meditations, because they're not getting enough air and they're not doing the practice correctly. So when you recognize that the mind has wandered away from the breath, the first thing you say is, aha, I've got you, with that strong smile on your heart. And then you take a really deep breath. That deep breath is most important. It starts to reoxygenate the body, but a more important part is that the breathing is normally controlled by the anterior cortex, back in what we call the reptilian brain, until you start thinking about your breath and start controlling it. And immediately, and this has been done with functional MRIs, that the front part of the frontal cortex starts to light up. It starts to fire. It starts to use energy. It starts to use oxygen. And so by taking that deep breath, we actually fire up the furnace that we want to fire up. We're giving it the oxygen that it needs to do its work. And you probably heard this many places, that the human brain or the human mind is the place where most of the calories are burned.
Yeah.
That if you go out into the cold weather, it's important to either have a good head of hair or a hat on. Because in cold weather, it will be the brain that loses all of our heat, and then we want to go to sleep.
Right.
All right. And then we die. And then we die. So put a hat on. Well, in Dallas, you don't need a hat, not with global warming. And by the way, on the side, I wanted to mention that I like your haircut.
Yeah, yours too. That's great.
So now we're gathering these factors together. The factor that we're gathering together is to have a mind that's free from hindrance, that we're gladdening the mind, that we're experiencing the mind. And now the one part that we've left off is the Vedana. So we're doing Kaya Nupassana with the long and the short breath, eventually get into experiencing the body. But the fourth one, the tranquilization of the body, is not going to happen with Kaya Nupassana only. We have to work with all of anapanasati together as we move up, so that we get the mind in a position so that the body can finally become relaxed. So the point that we're making now is that we have this body component, we have this mental component, and we have this mental object component. In the sense, is the mind free from hindrances or not? But the one that we haven't talked about yet is the Vedana, the feelings. And so we have to bring that into practice also. And that is basically the introduction to that, is that step 10 of anapanasati, of gladdening the mind. Gladdening the mind is the key for the mental component to assist the feeling component. Now, in the feeling component, it basically goes like this. We train the mind for rapture. We train the mind for sukha. We train the mind for watching the mental formations. And then we train for the elimination of these things. Now, this Vedana part is actually the major part of the practice of anapanasati. So there are 4 steps of the body, which is long, short, watching the body as it breathes, and then tranquilizing the body. In the Vedana, it's piti, sukha, watching, and then tranquilizing. In the mind, it is seeing the mind, gladdening the mind, freeing the mind, and then allowing the mind to come to that high state of samadhi. With the objects of the mind, we're going to first watch with the concept of knowing when hindrances arise, and then making sure later that it's not hindrances that are arising, that we're going to have only good, wholesome things in the mind, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But the first part that we want to look at is this Vedana, and you probably heard this word piti before, a rapture. Do you know what it means?
No.
Okay.
Well, rapture can mean.
It can mean, but what does it mean specifically here in this context?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. The first thing that we can talk about is that in all of the anapanasati, it's only the long breath. The good long where you can feel all of the body moving. You're taking a belly breath, you're taking a chest breath, you're taking an upper rib cage breath, and then you're relaxing, letting it out with a big sigh, like a sigh of relief. So this is that. This can be done because you know how to do it. Therefore, the operative verb is to understand. To understand when you're breathing in long, that you're breathing in long. To understand when you're breathing out long, that you're breathing out long. To understand that sigh. Also to understand the in and out breath when it goes back to kind of normal, which in the suttas is called short breath. But by letting it go back to normal, that invites the hindrances to come back again. So long as we're staying with the long breath, we can stay very concentrated. All right. But all of the other steps of anapanasati, the operative verb is to train. To train. This is skill development. So sati is a skill to be developed. Right effort is a skill to be developed. Right noble view is a skill to be developed. Attitude is a skill to be developed. Joy, gladdening the mind is a skill to be developed, and most importantly at this point in time is that rapture is also a skill to be developed. And it should be developed right from the very beginning. The very first time a student recognizes that the mind wanders away from the breath, you should practice the entire process. Now, the entire process of rapture, let me explain it to you this way. Everybody is looking for that. They're looking for it in all the wrong places. You could almost go so far as to sing the song, looking for love in all the wrong places. That's a Dallas song. Along with all my exes live in Texas. I've heard that one too.
Yeah, that's funny.
But looking for love in all the wrong places means that we're looking for rapture or piti in the outside world.
Yeah.
And this is how we find it. Imagine that you have someone who is a runner, and his job is running the 100-yard dash. And right at the finish line, as he's running this race, he recognizes that he's won this race. It might be only one step before the ribbon, but he knows he's won this race. And you can see it because he will puff his chest out so that as he crosses that finish line and touches that ribbon, he touches it with his chest.
Yeah.
He's not out there running like this. The running was done before. But once you recognize that you've won, that's the pity point. This is what he wants. That's the reason he's been training. That's the reason that he is running this race, is for the win. He wants to win, and now he's won, and now he's successful at that win. So we're actually going to be now working with and capitalizing on this word success, because that's what we're shooting for. We're shooting for that moment of success that comes with, aha, I caught the mind wandering away from the breath. And now I'm taking a deep, deep breath in as almost a triumph. That triumphal in-breath. All right, so this is what rapture is. Here's another example. The real estate lady has been working on a contract to get this piece of land sold, and finally she gets the seller and the buyer's contract signatures. At that point in time, when that, you can sometimes see this in the movies, that somebody's there signing a contract, and the guy who wrote the contract is there to grab that contract as soon as it's signed. He grabs it. Why? Because that's his moment of rapture. That's his moment of pity. That's his win. I've got it. Now, in the physical world, that I've got it, the I is the important point. But within our mental world, within the spiritual practice, within the Dhamma, we're taking the I out and putting all the emphasis upon the win, the success itself, to become successful. Now, this whole quality of success is generally not taught in the West, because most of the Westerners didn't stay in the Dhamma long enough to figure out what this rapture is. And so we all have various understandings of it. But it's what is to be cultivated, what is to be practiced, is the feeling of championship, the feeling of complete success, the feeling of domination. Now, that feeling of complete success or complete win in step number 5 of anapanasati, then will melt into step 6, which is called sukha. Sukha is actually the word that's exactly opposite of the word dukkha. Even in the Thai language, they use the word sukh, which means pleasure or joy or satisfaction. Okay, now the first word that we used with the rapture was the quality of success. But now the second part, which comes a moment later, is satisfaction, that we become satisfied, that we sit in a state of complete contentment. Now, in the process of doing that, by throwing out the hindrances, by gladdening the mind, by coming to this point of growing rapture or pity that's born from the seclusion of and the knowledge of the seclusion of the hindrances and this pleasure, guess what? We've now collected together the jhana factors for first jhana. And I bet you didn't even know that. That's right there in the Anapanasati Sutta. This is how you do first jhana.
That's funny.
And so we get to this point of first jhana, and let's talk about it. One is that the mind is free from hindrances. Number 2, it is joyous. Number 3, it is satisfying. It is success itself. And it is a quality that is to be developed. Now, once we get into this first jhana, now we have a job to do. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa talks about this state of mind as being a mind fit for work. The mind is fit for work, because when a mind is full of hindrances, not fit for work.
Right.
If the mind has hindrances, then whatever conclusions we come to will be conclusions that are based upon the hindrances, not based upon what's happening in the reality of this moment. And so very much of what we're going to be practicing is to start processing, mental processing, so that the results that we come up with in our mental processing match very closely the reality of the situation. Just like that 14-year-old in the hall, when he saw the bully, he thought he was actually out in the jungle, and he was terrified. Where in fact it wasn't a dangerous situation at all. So that young boy was not in reality. If he had been in the present moment, he would have been able to handle things in the present moment, but he wasn't. But now that we're practicing anapanasati and get the mind into this present moment so that it's happy, joyful, and successful, and staying at that steady state of sukha, that's where we sit to start watching. That's our perch. This is our noble viewpoint. It's this state of happiness. And we're going to be watching the mind, and any intruder, or actually another way we use this word quite often is guarding. To guard the mind. This is the point when it's done correctly with the Mahasi method. This is where the noting is done. If noting is done correctly, it's done in first jhana. If it's not done correctly, then it's done in hindrances. And then we note hindrances rather than noting the real thing. All right, so once we gotten into the first jhana, the noting is basically to note what comes into the mind. And we're going to note it in the sense of a guard. We're not going to allow unwholesome thoughts in. What are the unwholesome thoughts? That would be any kind of hindrances. Perhaps the hindrance we have right now is that kneecap that's over there. That girl should close that up. They should cover their knees, but that knee is there, and I want it. Right. This is called the Vipassana romance.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Then that's a hindrance to the joy. Why? Because if you're sitting there and wanting that kneecap, and you don't have that kneecap, that's a form of suffering. But there's also a form of suffering to sit there in meditation and want enlightenment. Wanting something you don't have is suffering. Mm-hmm. Isn't that amazing? Yeah, people destroy exactly what they want. They cannot have enlightenment because they want it. It's only when you don't want enlightenment, when you're already satisfied. This is satisfaction itself is the enlightenment.
Yeah.
Wanting enlightenment, you'll never get it.
That's funny.
But being able to become satisfied. And so with this satisfaction of mind, we begin to watch what's going on. There's two ways of watching what's going on. One is watch what's going on the thought level, and the other one is to watch what's going on the emotional level. But in the beginning, we want to start working with the thought level, because we want to make sure that any thoughts that come in are wholesome, happy, useful, associated with the here now. And we're not going to entertain or allow thoughts in the mind that have to do with the past, the future, work to be done, dissatisfactions, kneecaps, and anything else that I want, including enlightenment. Any kind of those thoughts, we chase them out. But what kind of thoughts are we going to allow into the mind then? The kind of thoughts about